So the issue that medical directors have is that their physician-patient relationship is of an indirect nature. That is, traditional medical malpractice insurance policies will cover a physician for their direct patient care responsibilities. That is, them providing direct care to hands-on care to a patient and or directing a nurse or someone else to provide such care to a patient. However, in a medical director environment, there is no hands-on or direct patient care responsibilities. Rather, there are indirect patient care responsibilities where they're setting policies, procedures, protocols within the facility, and then those policies and procedures and protocols are alleged to have been negligent. And therefore, medical directors need to be concerned about these indirect patient care responsibilities. Well, the medical director is responsible for making sure that there's a safe environment for the practice of medicine in the particular facility, or the nursing practice within a particular facility. So overall, the medical director has responsibilities for ensuring that all of the steps along the path of patient care are dealt with appropriately by the medical staff and those that are rendering care in the facility. So the facilities that medical directors provide their services in can be as vast as a hospital system, a nursing home system, or can be as small as a hospice or some other medical facility that only provides care to a few patients. But medical directors have the scope of medical directorship can be very extensive, where it's a full-time job, and can be very minor, where it's only a half a day a week or even just a few hours a week. What should a physician do when faced with a medical directorship opportunity? Well, typically physicians are going to be presented with a medical director agreement, and that medical director agreement will stipulate the duties that the medical director has to the facility. But in addition, typically that medical director agreement will also speak to what insurance is going to be carried either by the facility or by the physician, and it will also have what are called indemnification or hold harmless provisions in it that might cause the medical director to stand between a plaintiff and the facility relative to his or her decisions. And so when a physician is presented with the opportunity to be a medical director at a facility, it's very important that they get in touch with their insurance company or their insurance agent to evaluate the exposures that are under that medical director agreement, whether those exposures are taken care of under their malpractice insurance policy, whether an additional policy is needed, or whether the language of who's going to be responsible for the insurance and or who's going to be responsible in the event of a claim relative to the indemnification or hold harmless obligations, that those items are reviewed with their risk manager and or insurance agent to evaluate those exposures. So they need to call and make sure that those evaluations are done. One of the common mistakes that medical directors make is to not routinely update the policies and procedures that they have adopted. That is, they will initially go in and review those policies and procedures and say, yes, these meet what I consider to be the standard of care in my community. But if you don't go back and on a routine basis continue to both evaluate whether those policies and procedures are still up to date, but also to make sure that indeed those policies and procedures are being followed by the facility. So it's one thing to set the policies and procedures on the front end, but the medical director also has a duty to the facility and to its patients to ensure that those policies and procedures are indeed being followed. And many times plaintiff attorneys will be critical of medical directors in that they did not fulfill that duty to go back and ensure that the policies and procedures are being followed. Well, a medical director can have a number of different suits brought against them. First and foremost, traditionally you think about professional negligence claims against the facility, probably against the provider that actually rendered the care, but then also the plaintiff attorneys will add the medical director who set the policy, procedure, or protocol within the facility and allege that that policy or procedure or protocol was inappropriately set or was not the standard of care within a facility. There are other exposures that medical directors have, though, for their duties in managing the employee population. So to the extent they do hiring and firing, They can be alleged of wrongful termination, discrimination, harassment, all those things we typically think of as EEOC violations within a practice. There are a number of other directors and officers exposures, things that have to do with their duties on behalf of the corporation and running the corporation that a medical director also faces. Well, there are a couple of different ways to protect against this kind of exposure. The first is to rely upon the individual facility because typically a hospital system or a large hospital will have a directors and officers policy that will also extend to cover an individual medical director for their duties on behalf of the hospital. The alternative to that, and particularly for smaller facilities or facilities that will not allow the medical director to also be on the facilities policy, is to obtain an individual medical director liability policy that will cover the medical director for any duties that they had to the facility and to the patients of that facility. The cost for a medical director not to carry this insurance potentially is the attorney's fees it takes to get that medical director out of a case. A typical medical malpractice case is anywhere from $150,000 to $250,000 to defend. And if in the event that you don't have insurance applicable because you relied upon your individual malpractice policy that doesn't extend to any indirect patient care responsibilities that you had, you potentially are going to be on your own to fund attorney's fees at typically $300 to $400 an hour to represent you in a case. And though you may think it's pretty easy to get out of that case, many times it takes not weeks but months and years to remove yourself from any potential litigation. And meanwhile, the clock is running with your defense attorney and you have to foot all of that bill yourself in the absence of appropriate insurance. Well, the expense of a medical directorship policy depends on the size of the facility and the scope of the services that one is providing to a facility. But to give you a general feel, anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500 on the low end, up to maybe $7,500 to $12,000 on the high end would be the cost of a malpractice premium specific to medical directorship duties.